Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 8 of Project Ares, and we've made enough technological advancements now to begin some really interesting missions. We've recently improved our solar to be able to have sun tracking panels, just generally robotics in space, actually. We have perfected hypergolic propellants and restartable engines in orbit. We have throttle controls on certain engines, and we have lots of communications upgrades, including all the ground stations that we need on Earth, and now even a geosynchronous communications satellite. We're starting to look at manned flights soon, so we're starting to get into life support tech as well. For now, I have set up USI life support since it integrates better with MKS, which I'll be using. I've only ever used TAC life support, so I figured I should give some other mod a try for a change. I'm going to speed up the launch while also not cutting away or changing the view. That way you can see the cool real plume I have set up on my lower stage engine here. Notice how it has already spread out a lot since launch, and now is spreading out even more, but soon it shrinks as the air thins out more and more, which means there's less for the exhaust to interact with. That makes the plume dissipate until eventually we're up so high that there's almost nothing to see at all. I've added a bunch of mods to my install. Several were just to add parts, but I also added one called Easy Vessel Switch, which should be great for my EVA work that will begin soon. I also got Action Groups Extended working again, plus Kerbal Attachment System and Kerbal Inventory System. The flight we're starting with today is the first launch of a new space station. We're using the new Cerberus launcher again because it's our very first heavy lift vehicle, and this module's mass is about 20 tons. We're launching in a 45-degree inclination just in case other nations around the world want to build new launch pads to help support the space program, such as with cargo launchers for it or something like that in the future. I made a mistake though. It doesn't matter if we go 45 degrees north or 45 degrees south because either way it's the same thing once you're in orbit, but it does matter for the range safety under the flight path. And I had intended to go southeast, but accidentally flew northeast. Whoops! Sorry, Mogadishu in the Middle East. I hope no debris landed on anyone. Actually, Baikonur launches drop debris over land too. Countless bits, often containing toxic propellant components, were littering Kazakhstan. Anti-Russian sentiment there and lack of public knowledge about the true dangers of rocket debris led to political upheaval in the early 90s of real Earth. That spring, a 500-man battalion was formed to jumpstart a cleaning effort for picking up all the debris downrange from Baikonur. Anyway, an inclined orbit makes it easier to launch from almost anywhere on Earth, even though each individual launch is a little bit more difficult due to needing to wait for the orbit to pass over the launch site. That's how the real ISS works. The ISS has an inclined orbit so that it passes over many places like Baikonur, for example. If the ISS were completely equatorial, then it would cost way more fuel to get there from Baikonur, to the point that probably they wouldn't even do it at all. They'd probably launch from Kourou or all the time or something like that. So people have questioned how we're able to get so fast through Earth's history of technology. And I will remind you, the Kerbals came to Earth on the verge of wormhole travel, matter transporters, cloaking, warp drive, quantum communications, and so on. They were very advanced, and we have not lost that knowledge here on Earth. It's just that Earth didn't have any factories that could make that advanced tech. No scientists here were up to speed to help us out. All that has been changing very fast for many years now on Earth, or in Earth time. Also, since we've lost communication with Kerbin, the Kerbals on Earth are pushing the human knowledge faster than they had originally planned because we need to find out what went wrong. Also, remember that time on Kerbin is moving slower than here on Earth. Hours would seem like days, and so Kerbin is probably not going to figure out the wormhole problem and make contact with us before we figure it out here and make contact with them first. It's just a function of the temporal physics. We have effectively more time to figure it out, so we're more likely to do it first. Now, Jeb, Kamalak, and Neil have arrived in Africa. Katerina was already there from the previous mission. All 4 of them will be setting things up for manned tests very soon. Kamalak is going to be our test pilot. Jeb and Katerina are mission commanders for the first 2 flights. They will alternate commands. Eventually, one of them may be up to the space station while the other one is exploring the moon, but I don't really have it planned out yet, so we'll see how it goes. We're going to do low Earth orbit and moon missions first because we need to experiment with mods like MKS and Kerbal Attachment System here close to home before we take them far, far away. The humans want us to explore Mars and Venus eventually because they are the closest neighbors to Earth, and some people think that there are aliens living on one or both of those planets. The fact that Kerbals are real only helps to prove to those people that there's a possibility that life exists on Mars or Venus. The first module is in orbit now. It has a cupola on the end that I have pointed toward the Earth for later viewing once Kerbals get up there. We have our tracking solar extended, and now I've rotated to point those at the sun. I'm using the persistent rotation mod, which I'll use to link this ship to the Earth's rotation. That way the cupola will always be pointing down all the time. On the ISS, there is a cupola that points toward the Earth 100% of the time, but this is not going to be an ISS replica. The station will be made up of a bunch of imaginary modules that never existed for real, but that are inspired by many real-world ideas. Speaking of real-world ideas, Project Ares is sometimes going to be about real-world ideas that never happened and never will happen. We have a space station module, now we need a way to get crew to it, and no Project Ares series would be complete without an actual Ares to get crew to it. So, here are some snippets of what NASA Ares might have looked like. It lifts off on a single solid booster, which takes a couple of minutes to burn out, giving the crew a few kilometers of delta V to get things started. Separation and ullage motors then separate the core from the cryogenic upper stage, and then delayed charges cause the lower stage to tumble harmlessly off and out of the way. The interstage then drops away, allowing the drogue chutes to be deployed, and then the container with those in the upper assembly is decoupled, which allows the main chutes to open, and then the whole thing drops harmlessly into the ocean for later recovery by a ship. The real Project Ares was going to be part of the United States Constellation Program. The name Ares was picked because it refers to the Greek god Ares, also known by his Roman name Mars, the god of war. An early United States Ares was test-launched in 2009 from Cape Canaveral, Florida. It had all the same features, shape, and mass as the real Ares was planned to be, although all the internals were completely different because the upper stage wasn't real. It performed quite well, but ultimately the program was scrapped. When President Obama took office, he declared that Constellation was over budget, behind schedule, and lacking in innovation. So, boom, gone. My Ares, however, is almost fully functional and ready for manned flights. The one I'm testing today has no one in it. I'm just checking all the systems, especially the booster performance and its recovery systems. You're going to see several of the same features as the real Ares had proposed, though. There's a thrust curve for keeping the G-forces below 5, and thrust drops off before max Q to prevent overstressing. It has roll RCS near the top of the core, separation retros, and delayed retros to cause a spin. It has a separatable interstage and a drogue chute assembly. which can be decoupled to release the main chutes. The stats for the real booster would have been an evolution of the Space Shuttle boosters, but in my alternate reality, the shuttle has never happened, and so this is based on Kerbal Tech. The booster stats are therefore derived from RPA, that program that I explained previously. When looking at the details of the separation motors, in some examples they are situated near the top of that core booster, and in others, they are located near the bottom. I elected to go with the top-mounted variety. But we can wait no longer! Let's launch my version. You'll see that I have gotten Kerbal Constructs working for my RSS build and added some terrain features around the base. Unfortunately, the next time I reloaded the game, all the props had disappeared. So I'll need to redo that work and then figure out how to make it save so that next time, in between the restarts, it'll all still be there. The booster starts at just under 14,000 kilonewtons of thrust and ramps up to over 17,000 kilonewtons within the first 3 seconds. The first formulation of the solid fuel we're using has an ISP of 250 on the ground. Yes, that's technically better than the 248 of a space shuttle booster, but our vacuum ISP is only 265 right now, which is lower by 3 than the shuttle's booster. That's because we're still developing this tech, and there's room to advance for now. Between missions, we can make tiny bumps to the stats as we perfect things, which may actually be required in this case, because I think we're a couple hundred Delta V short of reaching the altitude of the first space station module that we have up for now. I'll be looking at the engine stats and the part masses to see if there's any way we can shave off mass or beef up performance. We're rolling to align ourselves for booster separation now. You can see the RCS motors on the top of the core working away. I have small tanks of hydrazine in the interstage to power those. The thrust is about to drop very fast. It has been dropping as we've lost mass anyway, and gets to about 20% right before it plummets. For my first test thrust curve, it dropped too slowly, going from 20% of max down to 1% over 15 seconds. That made it difficult for me to know exactly when to decouple, so I changed it, and now we drop from 20% to 1% over just 2 seconds. There goes the interstage that had the hydrazine tanks and RCS. We don't need that anymore because the upper stage has RCS of its own. The upper RCS had been disabled until now to prevent it being used before decoupling. I used the Action Groups Extended mod to access my hotkeys for flipping the RCS back on now though. Our Hydrolox engine has started as well, which has a small gimbal range to help with control, and 2 bits of mass that we don't need anymore are dropped. We can jettison the escape tower, capsule, arrow, shell, and we can jettison the side panels that were protecting that service module. I had to do a lot of custom configuring to get the interstage to work between the capsule and the liquid Hydrolox tanks. Decoupling kept causing the payload to pop off really fast and spin. I figured it had something to do with the clipping, and I even loaded the parts into Blender to look at their colliders, but in the end I never figured out why decoupling was behaving so badly, and I just created my own interstage frame part that I'll show in the VAB later. I'm using the Re-entry Particles Effects mod to improve the visuals of anything that's coming back down into the atmosphere, which is why you're seeing sparks on my booster. I have some air brakes on the stage as well that I try to activate by Action Group, but it keeps on saying no good. Later in a separate test, I discovered that I can activate the brakes by hand, even when the Action Group is saying no good. I have not figured that one out yet, but I didn't really look too much at it yet. I'll look into it a bit later. The drogue chute goes from red to gray in the staging icons, letting me know that I can release it. It's in a compartment at the top of the booster. However, the stresses of slowing down must be too much for it or something, because after a couple of seconds, it seems to just get ripped off the top after opening. It did slow things down a little bit though, so fortunately we're going slow enough that we can activate the main chutes to slow down the rest of the descent. Ripping the drogue free puts a terrible, terrible spin on the booster that lasts until we hit the water, but it doesn't seem to cause any other adverse effects. Still making its way to orbit is the Ares capsule. The Hydrolox tanks are almost dry. Meanwhile, the booster far below is hitting the water. We'll reuse that for the next launch and hopefully use that one to send crew to the space station. It's sized for 6 humans, so when we're done with it, the humans can use it too. They've been asking if we'd be willing to send men to the moon for them. We said, hey, hold on, first things first, let's send Kerbals to create a place that's habitable first. And the humans said, nah, we just want to go and walk around, maybe plant a flag for the Earth Union, and then come right back home. And we said, yo, are you crazy? That's ridiculous. Why spend all the money it's going to take to get there unless you're going to stay a while and do some real science? Maybe even live there for a year, an Earth year or something. Well, we're collecting the booster far below, so let's look back at our orbit. The Hydrolox is dry, and we can decouple the Ares service module now. I use another action group to enable the uppermost RCS, and we're using that to separate from the other stage. We start the new Ares hypergolic engine for the first time in space, and all seems to be in order. But I make a mistake with the remote tech. I activate the 2 dishes we have for communications. I'm going to test them, but I don't set a target for either one of them, and that's a mistake. Our low gain antenna must either not be working or it's out of range of anything, because the Ares loses communications before it makes a stable orbit. So while that coasts before re-entry and destruction, let's examine our crafts today in the VAB. You've already seen the heavy lifter, so we're just going to look underneath the fairing today because we had that new space station module that we launched. Although if we just go by the parts that are in this, we're not going to have a lot to look at, because if you notice here, it only has 20 parts in it. Yeah, it's got a lot of stuff all around the outside, but that's because I did my usual thing where I weld the parts together. You can't weld together all the docking nodes, and so some of the parts on this are the docking nodes. We have 2 regular ones on the sides there, and 2 here, 1 there, and 1 here. We're going to be using those in order to dock additional things onto the station, truss type segments and things like that. And then for actual modules you can travel through, we'll have the big ones that were on the sides. So that brings us down to 16 parts. One thing I had to do was I couldn't weld all of the lights, and so a good number of them are these green strip lights that we can see along on the outside here. So I'm going to pull those off. That gets us down to 9 parts. 2 of them are the solar panels that extend to either side, getting us down to 7. And then we have RCS was put on separately. We have the ones at the top, and we have some at the bottom. And that gets us down to 3 parts, despite the fact you can see all the wonderful greebling all along the outside of it still. There is a light down on here at the bottom, and if I turn the lights off in the VAB, you can see that it actually rotates and creates a cool, hey, look, danger sort of light, because you gotta have more lights, and so of course we put one on there like that. And having taken that one off, we are now down to 1 part, so you can see that all the rest of it is just that 1 core segment all welded together. It even has some animations in it, like I can deploy the docking bumper that is down here on the 1 docking port that does function. That pops out. We can deploy the docking sensor, which I have on the side. You can see that coming out right there. See, opens and closes. I have a radiation scanner that we can open up. That's this one right here, deploy radiation scanner. You can see it popping in and out. At the top, we have the ability to open up these windows right here. So open hatches, and those will pop open in space. We can also turn the hatch lights on, make it bright. And the one light that is welded, that's a strip light on the side, we can turn that one strip light on. I just can't turn all the lights on because of the way KSP works, and that's why the other ones had to be put on the outside, while this one strip light was able to be welded. And so that does it for this one. Let's also take a very quick look now at the Aries. All right, here we go. Going bottom to top, down here you can see that we have a row of retro boosters on each side because this thing is so massive. It's so heavy that we need a whole bunch of those. And of course on the side we have a bunch of lights all the way up there. You gotta have more lights, so we've got that right there and right there and right there all the way up. We have our air brakes on there. The retros here that are designated, if I look into the engine GUI, I can set them to burst. Whoop, take that. I can set these to either burst or delay. Burst or delay. And so the top ones are set to be on a delay. That's why this bottom stage here pops off like it did, and it came down like that, and then it went off to the side because of those retros. You can see in here, that's where the two parachutes are. So let me show you how this works. This comes off like that, and then this top piece would decouple separately from that and fly away. Then we have the next segment down here. This top one right here, you can see it ghosted out, has a parachute in there, and then this piece would, normally what's supposed to happen is this one decouples and then that parachute pops off, allowing the next one to activate, because that's where we've got our main chute right in there, and then that will recover this whole thing. This is our interstage that comes down. You can see that inside here, right there, we got two red hydrazine bottles, two red ones over there. Those are supplying this roll RCS right here. Around on the outside, we also have our ullage boosters, and then this drops off, falling away. I have a new upper stage engine, the Aries upper stage. That one operates on the liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. You can see that right here. So we have the one tank on the top, one tank on the bottom. We have the hanging hydrazine tanks down here under there. We can take those off. We have brand new from the Niche Parts mod, little RCS thrusters that look super cool. So I have those. We've got our engine there and those. The tank that's on the bottom is actually a tank that goes inside the shell. So there's a shell piece here. Let me show it to you in the VAB, in the part selector list. So over here we have the Aries upper shell. So that piece right there has nodes in it that I created so that I can then take my fuel tank for the top, not that one right there, the Aries hydrogen tank that goes on the top, and then we have the Aries oxidizer tank that goes on the bottom. And so those tanks are inside a shell. So if we pop that one off, we can see what that looks like. And let's see, we're scrolling up here. We have the outer doors that protect the insides there. We have our escape system and our shroud. And then if we go in here, you can see what I had to do in order to make a frame for the engine to sit in, because I talked earlier about how I was having troubles with that. So that frame is actually, it's a separate piece. This is one piece. It's welded together. It has the spots on it, the nodes. You can see the three at the top and then one at the bottom. Those nodes allow me to put the walls around the outside and then allow me to decouple them without there being any problems with that. So then we come down here, we take away the shell, take away the tank, and of course now we have almost finished off. We've got our ducking port and our strip lights. We have the Aries capsule. It has some backup chutes on the inside. We got to pull those legs back in. Those are going to come out later when we do our landing. We have a new upper stage engine, the Aries payload engine, some hydrazine tanks around the outside, new RCS, communication dish right there, solar panels. We have a cargo hold. We should be able to put some stuff in there when we need it. Open that up and we can see that this also has some lights in there. Gotta have more lights. Yes, okay. So this comes off and that leaves us to our heat shield that will protect it on its way back in. That pops off. The legs on that capsule can come out. It has engines around the outside of it. It also has on the inside some Flotation devices, we'll eventually get to see those. There are some tanks on the inside to hold fuel for all of these, so it's self-contained. They use the same propellant for these RCS engines. And on the top, it has more lights.
As you know, we lost contact with Earth several days ago. To them, it will have felt like months by now. There's not much we can do about that. They knew about the time dilation before they left. Well, we now know why we had to close the wormhole. A large meteor with a strange mineral composition on the Earth's side is approaching their planet. It's disrupting the link. That's the bad news. The worst news is we think it might be on a collision course with their planet. If we can't do anything about it, Earth might be destroyed.
And that is going to do it for this time. I will leave you here watching some of my early testing, one of my flights, one of my booster tests, and of course what happened to that capsule that we just launched after we lost contact with remote tech. So until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.